I'm Brian Scordato, and this is the Idea to Startup podcast, a podcast that's been called, quote, easily 10 times more useful than my MBA, which probably says more about higher education than our pod, but it was a nice review. We're going to start sending the pod along with some deeper content each week, so if you're a power listener of Idea to Startup, head to gettacklebox.beehive.com or the link in the show notes. Beehive is spelled a bit wildly, so it's gettacklebox.beehive.com. On to it. Today, we're going to help you slap a price tag on your first product, whether it's already in the market, in development, or just a twinkle in your eye. Pricing is usually the last thing entrepreneurs think about, and they nearly always get it wrong. We're also going to talk about my son dancing, and believe it or not, it's probably the most important part about pricing, but we'll do that last. We'll get there. The sequence for entrepreneurs I've met is nearly always idea, customer, product, and then, when every last excuse is gone, finally, grudgingly, price. And that reluctant price comes from looking at competitive products and then charging a bit or a lot less than they do, or just giving it away for free. You're new, you don't have as many features. That's fair, right? We're 215 episodes in, so you can probably sense my sarcasm by this point. Nearly every founder I've met screws up pricing because it's foreign and emotionally charged, because money's a made-up thing and we've all got a different relationship to it and we're all irrational about it. But if you screw up pricing, you probably irreparably screw up your chance at a successful business. A bad price cascades down into bad customers, which lead to bad products, which lead to bad marketing, which lead to you showing up on Deloitte's doorstep with a 13-month gap in your resume. And we don't want that. We want you to never build a resume again. So let's figure pricing out. By the end of today, I'll convince you that your first product needs to have what I call a Taco Bell price. Not because of how much Taco Bell charges, but because your first price should make you feel like you just ate that new Taco Bell concoction. The one that's got a cheesy tortilla and beans and hot sauce and the meat that comes out of the hose in the ceiling, and for some reason there's a massive Cheez-It in the middle. Quoting your price out loud should make you feel sick to your stomach. You should double over in pain, queasy, possibly regretting every life decision you've ever made, like I'd imagine that Taco Bell thing does to you. That is when you know you've priced your product right. The right price on your initial product will make 95% of potential customers dismiss it as impossibly high, and 5% yelp because it's impossibly low. That is where we need to start. We'll talk about how to do that practically today, and how it won't ruin your business like you think it will. We've got a bunch of examples because you've probably never priced anything brand new before, so the strategies will all be foreign and you need context and a framework. But first, we've got to talk about the best episode of the best show of the past decade. The episode is called Forks, and the show is called The Bear. The arc of Richie, a character in The Bear, is almost frustratingly good. I won't give spoilers, but his evolution lands him late in season 2 staging at a 3 Michelin star restaurant for a week. Basically, he's helping out with whatever job no one else wants to do. His task for the first couple of days is shining forks. Bins and endless bins of forks, one fork at a time. I'll put the link of the clip in the show notes. He's upset about this, and he's doing a half-assed job when his supervisor comes by and tells him a fork he just finished cleaning isn't clean. Richie rolls his eyes and says, "Yo, they're goddamn forks," to which the supervisor brings him outside to talk. He tells him that there's a wait list 5,000 people long trying to eat at this restaurant, that people wait their lives to eat there. He tells him about the faces of the people who get off that list and get to spend their time and their money at the restaurant, how stoked they are to be picked. Every day here, he says, is the freaking Super Bowl. Building a startup is going to be all the things you know it will be, but can't really internalize until they actually happen. Every startup is equally hard, whether the idea is a big one or a small one, a SaaS tool or a physical product, B2B or B2C, a success or a failure. They're all really, really hard. We talk a lot about motivation, but the best motivation to do that hard work is to be working on something that really freaking matters to someone. Something people would happily, willingly, unquestionably overpay for because of the leap it helps them make, because it is scarce. As a founder, you should be continually working to face things how they truly are. In the words of an author I unfortunately can't remember or find or I'd give him credit, you should be continually stubbing your toe on reality. Pricing is maybe the best tool for that job. It's an accelerant like those Nas cans in the Fast and Furious movies to the moment where you know clearly your real value to early customers. If your value is the cost of the inputs of your product plus a 30% margin, or maybe just slightly less than whatever competitors charge, you're sunk from day one. You're entering yourself in a race to the bottom, a competition with your competitors to lower the cost of your inputs or the labor required to combine them into your product. Worst of all, your business won't be able to grow because early margin is going to fund the growth and development of that business. It gives you runway, time to figure out economies of scale and features and all the things that allow you to move to the right on that adoption curve to eventually get to customers that aren't quite as excited about your product as your first customers are, and accordingly aren't going to pay as much and are going to need more features. That first price you charge to your first customers will, counterintuitively, be the highest price you are ever able to charge, even though your product will seem the least developed. These customers will work with you despite the fact that you've got no track record or social proof because you're solving something that is that important to them, something no one else can solve, and they'll pay a lot for it. I'd recommend this approach even if you're trying to raise venture funding eventually because, again, it's going to attract the customers that really care. It'll make sure the thing you're working on every day is the quote, freaking Super Bowl for someone, and it'll give you options. If you don't end up raising funding, who cares? Your business is going to be profitable. I remember when I was building Find Your Lobster, a mobile dating app back in the Hinge and Tinder days, and things were at their toughest. Our app was free, and people sort of used it, but they also jumped between us and Hinge and Tinder, and there wasn't any real differentiation. The goal was always to get a bunch of people on and then figure out the monetization thing later. At the time, this way was the way. Because of that, I never really knew what I had. All my customers were there for different reasons. I couldn't get feedback from any of them because it wasn't important enough to them to actually give me feedback, like when Amazon asks you to leave a review on toothpaste. It wasn't the Super Bowl for any of my customers. It was just one more app they checked in on once in a while. If it was gone, they wouldn't miss it. I specifically remember a Saturday night at maybe 2 a.m. on the 20th or 30th or 50th day in a row that I'd worked, sitting in my parents' basement because I'd moved home to save money on rent, and it hit me that I just didn't care. Because my customers didn't care. I'd built something they were meh about, something I couldn't charge a premium for because they wouldn't dream of paying it. And I was in purgatory. I was busting my ass for my reputation and for my investors and because I didn't want to fail, but it wasn't for my customers because the product didn't matter to them. Forget about it being the Super Bowl for them. It wasn't even a Duke basketball game. Editor's note, pack of cheaters. If, instead, I decided that I'd only build something if I could charge $99 a month for it or $199 a month for it, because that's what it costs to build that business, it would have forced me to find customers willing, happy, able to pay that much. It would have forced me to differentiate, to stub my toe on reality, what people actually cared about. Pricing isn't something to be avoided. It's a lever to get you to that reality, to make sure you're moving towards the freaking Super Bowl for someone, to ensure that ROE, that return on effort, is going to be worth it because the effort side of that equation is fixed. Once you make stubbing your toe on reality a practice, you're going to love it. My old boss always used to say that reality is energizing. When things are tough in business or in life, getting to the clearest view of reality allows you to make an effective plan, to get momentum, and nothing is better than that. The draining thing is living in the unknown. So let's use pricing to get to reality. And let's do it after a little smooth jazz. If you've got a startup idea and a full-time job and want to test out the former before you leave the latter, come and work with us. Apply at gettacklebox.com. Over 400 startups have tested and built ideas through our program, and those businesses are now collectively worth over $1 billion. Our program helps you prioritize and execute, and our members and me and the team keep you accountable and give you feedback along the way. Come build with us at gettacklebox.com. What price is? The 4 places to find margin. Let's start with what the price of your product actually is. It is not, as I said, an aggregate of the cost of your inputs. It is a measure of your differentiation. Entrepreneurs think about price a lot, how much their product is going to cost, but What actually matters is the margin. And margin for us means differentiation. How much someone will pay above your input costs because of how unique or differentiated or scarce or whatever what you've built really is. Startups are a hunt for margin. I think about margin like the grade a teacher gives you at the end of the semester. It shows how well you've done on customer development. If you've wiggled your way to a customer who's in a giant hole no one else has noticed or can throw them a rope, you'll be able to charge a lot for that rope. There's huge margin there. But if you found your way to a customer who needs to walk 5 blocks to get to dinner and you pull up to them and offer a ride, they'll probably only take it if it's cheap or free. The alternative, walking a few blocks, just isn't that bad. There's no margin there. Unless, of course, you position yourself at the end of a marathon, and runners who just finished 26 miles are going to pay any amount of money to avoid taking another step. And if you're the only car there, it makes it even better. The best way to become a good chef is to find a hungry customer. We've always found that margin comes from reliable places. There are 4 big places where our founders have found margin that we'll talk through today. The 4 best places to find margin. Number 1, margin comes after pain. I wrote about this in my Sunday member email this week. Email teammech@tacklebox.com with the subject Sunday if you'd like to get on that list. When you're picking a customer to start with, you need to pick a customer that's actively trying to solve a painful problem. It's likely that during your interviews, you'll find lots of customers that you'll notice are in holes, but either don't recognize that they're in a hole or, for whatever reason, aren't trying to get out. Customers can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent, so never try to convince someone they're in a hole and that it makes sense for them to do something about it. The best customer, and the place where margin lives, exists in a world after pain. If your product is a Pilates program that helps someone build up a strong core, a great customer is not just someone who wants a strong core. It's someone who's felt serious, unsolvable pain because they don't have a strong core for some reason. Maybe they had crippling back pain and needed to have surgery, and the doctor said the way to get back from that pain post-surgery is a strong core. Maybe they tried physical therapy and strength classes and neither worked. Maybe they heard Pilates could help. That is where the margin lives, and the only place change happens, after pain. Another example is a service to potty train your kid. After you've beat your head against the wall for weeks or months and felt the pain of accidents and embarrassment and diaper changes, you're ready to pay a huge margin for someone to just handle it for you. Change comes after pain. If your customer can't pinpoint the moment in the past where they felt egregious, disproportionate pain because of the problem you're solving, it is unlikely they'll change their behavior to solve that problem, and unlikely they'll pay you a healthy margin to help. Number 2, margin comes from removing the worst part of a painful process. Margin comes from taking something people hate doing but have to do off their plate. A business went through Tacklebox a while back that was going to be a directory for people above the age of 60 to find new doctors. People generally have the same doctor from the time they're in their 20s, so usually by the time they're 50 or 60, that doctor is getting old or retiring and they need to find a new one. This is disconcerting and hard. At first, the product was a directory to help them find local doctors, but the finding wasn't the hard part of that process. The evaluating was. So they started with a concierge service that began by understanding the needs of the patient, then found a handful of qualified doctors, scheduled Zoom introductory calls, and created takeaways and suggestions. They charged a lot for this, and people happily paid because it removed the most painful part of a daunting and necessary process. I'll say it again. Margin comes from doing things people hate doing for them. Number 3, margin comes from a status level jump. People make decisions based on envy, not greed. We judge ourselves based on the people or companies we deem as in our peer group, and the group may be one standard deviation away. You don't compare yourself against Jeff Bezos, you compare yourself against your neighbor. So, helping your customer jump out of their current status group and move into a new status group generates margin. People will pay irrational amounts of money for this, especially when it becomes blindingly obvious that they've made that status level jump. We'll talk through an example of this in a moment. Number 4, margin comes from specificity and problem language. When I used to live in New York City, Ruby and I would go to the farmer's market in Union Square every Wednesday. Our first stop was obviously the farm stand that had the barbecue pig ears for young rubes, but after that, we'd walk around and try and figure out why certain stands had lines and others didn't, because that's the sort of thing that gets me going. The farm stand lines would fluctuate solely based on line size. When one line got a bit long, people would go to the farm stand with the fewest people, like the lines at the grocery store. Most other stands were similar. But the honey stands, and there were always three or more of these, had a pattern, even though they all sold honey from upstate New York or Jersey. One always had a long line, and the others didn't. So, what was going on? The stands without the lines sold honey that was, quote, organic and ethically sourced and great in tea or cereal or, quote, wherever you want to put it. The stand with the line had a sandwich board out front that said, quote, our honey cures your seasonal allergies. Then the honey at the stand was broken into two categories. One said, your eyes and throat itch. The other said, your nose is running and your head hurts. Each had a suggested tea you could buy along with the honey. And importantly for our conversation today, that honey was twice as expensive as the honey at the other stands. People pay margin to solve problems, and they pay for someone who understands exactly how they feel. Specificity and problem language create margin. Now, let's use an example, one I've talked about on the pod before, but not in this way specifically. Basketball lessons. Right out of college, I taught basketball lessons on weekends to middle school kids on the Upper East Side. There were a ton of people giving basketball lessons on all the empty courts at the time, with most putting flyers around all the schools to get customers. I looked at these flyers and decided I'd differentiate on something none of the other coaches mentioned. They all talked about price and the types of drills they ran and individual or small group packages. But I said I was there to work with kids who wanted to play college basketball. This idea came to me as that's what anyone who knew me and had younger kids always asked about. How could they prep their kids better to play college hoops? I inadvertently used problem language on the flyer. I didn't know what it was at the time, but my flyer said something like, quote, unless you played college basketball, you don't know the drills that'll help prepare your kid for it. I did, and I can teach them. The goal, as stated on the flyer, was to prep their kids for a college scholarship. And I charged double what every other coach charged, often more than that. My thinking was that if I was waking up at 7 in the morning on weekends, it had to be worth it for me. Return on effort. I quickly got a roster of kids, and the parents talked incessantly to me about colleges, how they can be coaches, when recruiting started, what AAU team their kid should play on. I realize now that what I was dealing with was the third type of margin, a status level jump. All the other kids were playing basketball because they wanted to get better and maybe make a high school team. But my customers, they had their sights set on college basketball. A really interesting thing happens when you build a product that has a lot of margin. Your customers get involved. They give you tons of feedback and help you make the product fit what they're looking for. I remember one day asking a parent if, instead of starting at our normal 8 a.m. the following weekend, we could start at 7:30. The courts got crowded at 8 because that's when all the other lessons started. A half hour earlier would give us some more space. We could do earlier than that, the dad said excitedly. How about 6:30 in the morning? I guess, I said. How great would it be, he continued, if when everyone showed up for their lessons, my son was already drenched in sweat and finished. That shows so much dedication. So we started at 6:30, and I charged more. Margin comes from a status level jump, particularly a highly visible one. Pay yourself first and a $900 assistant. The best personal finance advice is to pay yourself first. The idea is simple. You take a portion of your paycheck the moment you get it and immediately put it into savings or investments or use it to pay off debt. That all but ensures your finances will be healthy long term. I think of pricing the same way. The pay yourself version of this is to lead with price, to make sure there's enough margin for the thing to make sense to build. A founder from the pod reached out recently because they're starting a business that'll be sort of a personal AI assistant. They thought it'd be right up my alley, and it is, although they hadn't even considered a pun name, which I felt was lazy. At least give me a token Chat Jeeves PT or something, although maybe nothing is better than that. Anyway, the founder excitedly told me the features. Quote, It could summarize your emails and give smart takes on your task list and create daily logs or journals of who you met with. It can pull together recordings of Zooms and schedule follow up meetings. It's literally like having a full time assistant. Cool, I thought. How much are you charging? Well, the founder said, I want it to be free for initial users, but eventually I'll be in the $9 to $30 a month range, depending on which plan you have. So my thinking is it's sort of like Netflix plus Spotify. I want to keep it under that cost. And that is what founders do with pricing. They pick arbitrary numbers, Netflix plus Spotify, or numbers that seem sort of low, and they go with them for some reason. My advice, as always, is to do the opposite, at least to start. To find a customer and create margin with your product in one of the ways we mentioned, to charge a whole lot to solve a real problem, to make sure the customer's got skin in the game, a reason to give you real feedback. I responded with a pricing prompt that's always helpful. I asked what they do if they needed to charge $300 a month. The founder thought for a minute and then responded, well, we'd have to think of people that really need this thing. One customer that's jumped out from early customer interviews has been people who are running communities. Often they have between 50 and 200 people in an online community on Slack or Circle or something. It's for a podcast or a YouTube show or a course or a cohort or an accelerator program. And managing that is way more work than they thought it would be. They've often tried to manage it themselves, but it's exhausting. It takes hours a day. Or maybe they hired someone, but that is expensive. So I guess they'd happily pay $300 a month if this managed a community for them with prompts and responses and things. And there you go, a few types of margin. First, you're targeting customers that have already felt the pain because they tried to do this themselves. Second, you took the hard part off their plate. Interacting with the community in real time, which would mean they'd have to have alerts on all day and night, stinks. Third, you potentially created a status level jump by helping them create a high quality community. These all equal margin. So it's maybe an interesting first customer. And finally, if someone's paying you $300 or $500 or $900 a month, they're going to care. They're going to help you iterate through feedback and product suggestions. They're going to give you real feedback, tell you if this thing is useful or not. You'll learn what it takes to have a customer that pays you a lot. The product will certainly be more manual and more intensive and not as scalable, but that's all right because you'll be figuring out how to scale a product worth hundreds of dollars a month, not, quote, the same as Spotify or Netflix. The good questions to ask are, what if you charge 10x what you're planning on charging? Who is going to pay? Why? Where is the margin? The end. My son loves to dance. My son, as I said, loves to dance. We've got a Tony box, which, if you don't have a toddler, is a little box that you can put figurines on, like Moana or Simba, and it plays songs from those movies. He loves picking out a figurine and then dancing while the song plays. When the Tony runs out of batteries, he gets sad and brings it to me and says, more. There's a brewery near us that we go to a lot. It's got live music most nights, and when we get into the parking lot, he realizes and he starts squealing, and the second we're through the gate, he sprints to the front of the band. He shakes his hips like those old hula girls that used to sit on people's dashboards in 80s movies. He'd stay there for 10 hours if we'd let him. He dances to the construction sounds that come from our neighbor's house and to the turn signal in my car and the coffee grinder in the morning. What I'm getting at is that I love watching my son dance more than just about anything in the world. And that is why pricing is so important. Because of all the things you can screw up with a startup, pricing is probably the worst one, because pricing is the top of that waterfall. If you don't charge a lot, you'll get customers that don't really care. If they don't really care, they'll always want to pay less and get more to see if that makes them care. And they'll be fickle, and they'll leave for no reason, and they'll be expensive to find and convert, and you'll spend your life trying to figure out how to make a business work with tiny margins, and you won't be able to do it. And your son will dance in the other room and you won't see it, or whatever your version of that is. Your family, your friends, the piano in the living room, the novel you'd like to write, they won't be as big a part of your life because you'll be trying to make someone who doesn't care, or trying to figure out how to make a business work with people paying you a few shiny pennies a month. Stub your toe on reality. Find real margin, real value. Find the Super Bowl for someone and charge for it. This was the Idea to Startup podcast brought to you by Tacklebox. If you've got a startup idea and a full-time job, head to gettacklebox.com and apply. We'll get back to you in 72 hours and can be working on your idea by the weekend. Have a great week.